Golly. This is chapter 15. Where's Rudy G'day? Amanda faces Mangione. Manini, November 18th, 1830, 2007. In town, there's a growing feeling that Patrick Lumumba is not the boogeyman of Mez's ugly story. Detective Martina on bravadagallo.it. Meanwhile, 21-year-old Rudy G'day was still in Germany, away from his little flat, the dance clubs, and everyone he knew. His friend Gabriele Mancini, the son of one of his childhood teachers, was concerned because Rudy hadn't touched base in 2 weeks. When Gabriele checked in the internet in mid-November, he noticed that Rudy's instant messenger account was active. He tried to reach him just to say hello. He was worried that Rudy might have run away, a habit of his from childhood. As Rudy's friends knew, he was fresh out of family. In fact, he'd been at loose ends for much of October, depressed, drinking a bit more than usual. Certainly, he'd never had it easy. His mother had abandoned him at birth in Ivory Coast, and he'd immigrated to Italy with his father, Roger Goudet, from Abidjan when he was 5. They could have settled in Lecco near Milan, where Rudy had an aunt, but Roger found a job as a laborer in Perugia, and they went there instead. They lived in Ponte San Giovanni, outside the city walls, where Rudy went to the local schools. His teachers knew he had no one to care for him, so they took him home after school each day and let him stay with them until his father could pick him up. Then in 2002, when Rudy was 16, his father turned his world upside down. Roger decided to move back to the Ivory Coast. Incredibly, Paolo Caporali, a wealthy Peruvian businessman, then informally adopted the twice-abandoned boy, having met Rudy when the teenager played on a local basketball team that the Caporali family sponsored. His coaches remembered Rudy as talented and well-behaved, but not tall enough for superstardom. Eventually, Rudy accepted a gardening job on a Caporali estate, but the work didn't suit his nocturnal party lover. He had to rise early to catch a bus to the countryside and to work in the soil all day, returning home tired, dirty, and dispirited. Meanwhile, his childhood friends were going to college, getting on with their lives. Rudy himself was not without cleverness. He had a gift for gab. He spoke fluent Italian with heavy Umbrian accent, knew a smattering of English, and had studied both hotel keeping and accounting sporadically. But as his adoptive father complained, he loved the nightlife, spending more and more time in Milan or with his aunt in Lecco, skipping out on his gardening job. Caporali sacked Rudy at the end of August 2007, about the same time Meredith arrived in Perugia, eager to live out an Italian dream. The magnate also ousted him for the family's home, saying that Rudy was a tremendous liar who preferred video games to work. He was like another son to us, Caporali said later. I cannot hide the fact that he disappointed me. I thought I could help him build a future, but with the passing of time, I realized I had made a mistake. Now in mid-November, Rudy had been incommunicado for 2 weeks, which was strange since he was kind of a guy who liked to stay in touch. Gabriella finally got a cryptic instant messenger response. Rudy, I can't. Gabrielle What can't you, Rudy? You know. Gabrielle, what am I supposed to know? Rudy disconnected. On November 18, 2007, Italian police announced a worldwide manhunt for the fourth man. They described him as a North American Arab involved in the drug trade. Even though the description didn't quite fit Rudy, Gabrielle paid a visit to the flying squad office in Perugia and told the officers about his missing friend. On November 19th, police made it official. Rudy Gade was the fourth man. The Rome forensics lab, whose results had finally come in, was able to identify him through the bloody imprint of his hand on Meredith's pillow. Though they'd also lifted his DNA off a toothbrush in his flat, which would eventually allow them to identify his papillary fragments found on toilet paper in the larger bathroom and the cells he left inside the victim during the sexual act, which he himself later described as consensual petting. Rudy awoke in Germany to see his face flashed on TV screens everywhere. Police had given the stations everything from his residency ID card to mugshots snapped in Perugia and Milan. Reporters quickly raided his Facebook page, uncovering such gems as a photo of Rudy posing with Giorgio Armani in the fashion designer's Armani bar in Milan. Rudy had been so fond of this photo that he'd even used it as a screensaver on his computer. The famous man's public relations staff quickly disavowed all knowledge of the Perugia fugitive, saying Mr. Armani was a friendly person who often posed with pictures with people he didn't actually know. Rudy's vampire photo, which he'd made just to amuse friends, quickly made its way to YouTube. Now anyone in the world could see him baring his teeth and saying in lurid English, "I'm Count Dracula, I'm going to suck your blood." Meanwhile, police were looking for a friend who'd help them bring Rudy in. Because he'd kept his Facebook page open, this task was a breeze for the cops. After they grabbed the names off the web, they simply asked around until they found a friend willing to help them nab the fugitive. Giacomo Bendetti, a longtime buddy of Rudy's, who had played in a local band, agreed to keep an eye on his instant messenger account. On the 19th, he saw activity, so he went to the police station and connected with Rudy there. They chatted first on Messenger, and then Giacomo casually suggested a switch to Skype, telling Rudy that he'd cover the cost if Rudy would go to the internet point and make the connection. Later, audio of this 3-hour call was posted on the web. Rudy speaking with a thick, unmistakable Umbrian accent. Giacomo asked him how he was. "Not too well," Rudy replied, saying he'd been sleeping on trains and barges on the Rhine. Giacomo asked him what the problem was. Rudy, "I'm in Dusseldorf and I have no money." Giacomo, "Would you like me to send you money?" Rudy, "Well, that would be useful." Giacomo, "Okay, I'll send you 50 euros through Western Union and then you can pick it up." Rudy, "Thanks, but I'm already late in the evening." Giacomo, "They're talking about you here in Perugia." Rudy, "I know what happened in Perugia, but they're making a mistake. I'm not the Baron. I'm called Baron after Baron Scott, the famous basketball player." Giacomo, "But they are saying other things." Rudy, "Listen, I know those girls. I knew them both, Meredith and Amanda, but nothing more, you know that. I've been to their house twice, the last a few days before this business, but I didn't do anything. I have nothing to do with this business. I wasn't there that evening. If they found my fingerprints, it means I must have left them there before." Giacomo, "But your photo is elsewhere." Rudy, "I've seen it. The police were wrong to put my photo around like that. I'm not how they describe me. I have nothing to do with that night." Giacomo, "But if you have nothing to do with it, why don't you come back? I'll help you find a good lawyer who can clear things up." Rudy, I am afraid, but I don't want to stay in Germany. I'm black, and if the police catch me, I don't know what they might do to me. I prefer Italian jails. Even more bizarre than the Skype call was that Rudy responded that same day to a reporter for the Telegraph who'd left a message for him on Facebook. He was allegedly on his way back to Italy to turn himself in to the police, wrote Malcolm Moore in the Telegraph story called Meredith, Suspect Caught After Sleeping Rough. Moore said that Rudy knew he was the target of a manhunt and claimed that he wanted to talk to the police and to clear his name. The fugitive wrote, apparently in English, I know what I am a suspect, adding, the reason I want to talk to the policeman because the news gave at me a wrong profile. During the Skype call with Guacamo, Rudy eventually sketched out his first alibi. He told his friends a story about seeing Meredith at the Halloween party, flirting and then setting up a date with her for the next night. He showed up, they fooled around, but then they had to stop because he didn't have a condom. He went into the bathroom and sat on the toilet. Then he heard a buzzer and came out of the bathroom with his pants down, tripping, falling over. Which is why he couldn't do anything when he spotted an intruder who murdered Meredith. As Rudy said of this mystery man during the Skype call, I couldn't stop him while he escaped. I couldn't see him well. He had brown hair, maybe chestnut. I know he's Italian because we insulted each other. Then I tried to aid Meredith by putting a towel on the wound. I don't know why I didn't call an ambulance. Rudy said that when he left, the window wasn't broken and Meredith was dressed. He didn't mention either Raffaele or Amanda. Perugia police planned to rush off to Germany and spring a trap, but the very next day, German cops nabbed Rudy Gade on a train near Mainz, where he was riding without a ticket. He told the German police that he left Perugia because he'd had trouble with a girl, but they didn't buy that story. They arrested him, took him to Koblenz, and put him behind bars. On November 21st, he delivered the first of his colorful stories to German police. Regarding Amanda Knox, he said that he knew her from La Chic and added, sometime later I met Meredith. She was with two guys I know from playing basketball together. I don't know their names. Although prosecutor Manini insisted Rudy had a powerful crush on Amanda, in his own statements, Rudy fixated on the British girl, whom he found sweet and beautiful. He mentioned Amanda as a troublesome roommate, a pot smoker, and a girl of loose morals, based evidently on his reading of her Foxy Knoxy stories. He told the police that the story about meeting Meredith on Halloween, when he'd been out with his Spanish friends. Supposedly, she'd set up a date with him for 8:30 the next night. He said that he'd arrived at the cottage around 7:30 or 7:45 p.m. He couldn't say exactly when because he didn't wear a watch. Meredith wasn't home, nor were the boys downstairs. So he went back into the town center, ate in a kebab shop near Latana del Orso, and then returned to his still empty house. He waited around for a few minutes, and then Meredith showed up and let him in. They went inside, flirted and kissed, but he claimed he didn't have sex with the victim, nor did he violate her in any way. And I would be willing to take a medical exam to prove this, he said. Rudy interrupted his narrative at this point to say that he needed to tell the police something very important. When he and Meredith first went on a date, she had opened a little drawer in her nightstand and discovered her cash was missing. He said that she immediately suspected Amanda Knox, saying that she was always smoking marijuana, and she went into the American girl's room to look for her money. Amanda wasn't there, Rudy said. He then described going into the bathroom near Amanda's room, where he said he sat on the toilet long enough to hear 3 hip-hop songs on his iPod. Then he heard a loud scream over the music. He ran out of the bathroom without time to zip up his pants and encountered an Italian man. Rudy said he called out, "What are you doing here?" And then the man said, "Black man found! Black man found!" Black man found, guilty man found. After some altercation, the intruder left and Rudy rushed into Meredith's bedroom where she lay bleeding to death on the floor. He grabbed some towels from the bathroom to staunch her bleeding. She tried to name her killer and with her dying breath, either by choking out the initials AF or the sound F. Rudy said that he was extremely upset and couldn't remember what he did after that. But maybe he touched a few things in his panic. Yes, perhaps even the bed. He was shocked to death, he said, because he'd never had a similar experience. He thought he heard some noises in the downstairs flat, so he fled. He claimed Meredith was still alive when he left, and in all of his alibis, he blamed himself for being too frightened to do anything to save her. Rudy attached a number of fascinating addendums to this tale. He said that he'd worn jeans on the night of the murder and took them to Dusseldorf for washing, but assured officers they'd find the rest of his clothes in his flat. He knew there'd been a robbery because he'd followed the case in the newspapers, and for that reason he wanted police to know that the window wasn't broken at the time he was there. Also, he left Meredith's bedroom door open and hadn't locked the front door himself, which would have required using Meredith's key. He confirmed that he'd been in Germany for 2 weeks and mentioned his 2 run-ins with the police in Stuttgart and in the Bavarian town of Monaco in the Alps, but both cases the officials had released him. Indeed, Rudy appeared to have been skillful at sweet-talking the police. While awaiting extradition, Rudy too composed a diary, adding more details to his alibi, a habit he would continue over the next 2 years. The start of the story remained the same. He encountered Meredith on Halloween, went to her house the next night, and then they made out in her room. But at the same time, he went into the bathroom because the kebab he'd eaten had upset his stomach. He strapped on his iPod and listened to some tunes, then heard Meredith give a very loud scream. He rushed out of the bathroom, his pants around his knees, to find Meredith lying on the floor of her room, bleeding while an Italian guy with a knife stood over her. Rudy said he fended him off with a chair. The left-handed intruder told him he'd better flee because he was black and would get blamed for the crime. So Rudy took off, always without saving Meredith. The Monster of Florence, co-author Douglas Preston, found Rudy's alibi unconvincing. The rapist's most common defense is the victim and I had consensual sex. I left, somebody else came in and murdered the victim. I came back, saw what had happened, got scared, and ran. Let me tell you, this is a pathetic lie they all tell. When Rudy Gaudet finds her, does he help her, call the police, or call an ambulance like any normal person would? No. He flees the country because he says he was afraid of the police would think he did it. The entirety of his story is, in my opinion, an obvious lie. Look, I write thrillers for a living, Preston added, and in my thrillers, the person who you least expect is the guilty party. But in real life, it doesn't work like that. There is no conspiracy here. In real life, murderers are banal and obvious. This case is no different than any other. I have seen the photos. This is a typical rape and murder scene. Sure, there will be loose ends. Even the most banal crimes have a puzzling element to them. No case ever adds up completely. People cannot expect that. When Rudy Gaudet's photo hit the TV screen, Zach Nowak immediately recognized him. I used to see him in the pubs. He's the classic Italian girl botherer. The kind of guy who goes up to a girl in the bar whom he doesn't know and makes a move. She lets him know that she is not interested. He makes another move. She lets him know again, and he still keeps trying. At this point, you're not just hitting on a girl, you're bothering a girl. Some guys are just too persistent. This is not an African trait, it's an Italian guy trait. He was raised here, remember? As for Raffaele and Rudy knowing each other, Zach doubted even Perugia's class system. Zach doubted that, given Perugia's class system, even though Rudy and Raphael lived on the same street, they could have walked by each other 100 times, and likely Raffaele would never have noticed him. Raffaele is Mr. Spit and Polish, and Rudy is a layabout, do-nothing guy in the neighborhood. As for Raffaele organizing a sex party and including Rudy Gaudet, give me a break, it would never happen. In fact, Zach thought that it was unlikely that anybody would be partying that night because the foreign students were exhausted from Halloween night and many Italians had left the town for All Souls weekend. Rudy was often seen in Corso Garibaldi neighborhood grabbing a slice of pizza using the internet point doing normal things. Up the hill at the Latana del Orso, owner Lucy Rigby and Esteban Puscol had gotten a bad impression of Rudy the first time he came in because he claimed to be American. They both lived in the U.S., so the lie was apparent, but the second time Rudy told Esteban that he was interested in wines and hoped to learn from him, and they had an enjoyable conversation. Pisco Alessi and Merlin's co-owner remembered Rudy as a guy who hung around with the bad crowd on the church steps at night. If you hang around and hang out on the steps like that, then you are either taking drugs or you are selling them, he said. But Zach Nowak doubted Rudy was up to anything major. I never saw him dealing, and having never heard anyone say he was dealing, Zach said. I think he was just a small-time crook. Rudy's arrest was a godsend for Patrick Lumumba, freed by prosecutor Manini on November 20th. The bartender emerged from prison wearing the same brown sweater in which he'd been arrested, kissed his wife and son in front of the cameras, and flashed a radiant smile. Patrick announced that he would never forgive Amanda. Patrick announced that he would never forgive Amanda. Indeed, he would later become a vocal critic of hers, often appearing on Italian television shows such as Porta a Porta, to criticize her as a skillful actress, a queen bee, and a crier of crocodile tears. He announced that as soon as Judge Mattini officially released him from any connection to the Kercher case, he intended to sue Amanda for slander. He was not the only one to file a civil suit. The Kerchers filed civil claims against all the suspects, as did the owner of the cottage. After many months, police allowed Patrick to reopen La Chic, but the struggling club remained near empty many nights and eventually it closed down. When Raffaele learned of Rudy's arrest, he wrote to his father saying that it sounded like a good development, but he was worried about what this new person might claim. An officer came to Amanda's cell to tell her about Rudy's arrest. In her diary, she described this exchange. Me, Rudy, the fourth person, the policeman. Yes, so you'd know him. Me, vaguely. The policeman, vaguely, huh? We'll see what he says about that. Scout. Me, okay. Have fun hating me, buddy. I haven't done anything wrong. Amanda was thrilled, on the other hand, when she heard that Manini had released Patrick. Patrick got out today, she wrote in her diary. Finally, something is going right. Maybe I'll be next. Well, most likely Raffaele before me, but soon. I'm so happy. Amanda's lawyers predicted she'd be out in 2 weeks. if only on house arrest, but they couldn't protect her from the British tabloids, which began offering money for exclusive interviews, creating that one Italian journalist called the Supermarket of Horrors. The rumor was the leading figures in the Kercher case would sell their stories twice, once in British for six figures and once in Italy once in Italy through the considerably less. Meredith's boyfriend reveals the moment he suspended Foxy Noxie killed his lover, announced England's Daily Mail in a November 18th exclusive, with Guacamos Lindsay pictured with a beard, shaved head, and black ear studs. He said Meredith was beautiful and innocent, but Amanda, well, he'd wondered if she was a killer the second he saw her at the Questera, hours after Meredith's body was found. Yes, she'd hugged him and said how sorry she was about her roommate's death, but right afterwards a chill ran down his spine. A clue that the writer might have taken dramatic license was that Guacamo supposedly said the girls were as different as chalk and cheese, a decidedly British phrase indeed. When he had a chance to trash Amanda in court, Guacamo instead described her in warm tones, just as he had in his witness reports. Then, on November 24th, Amanda and Raffaele became the couple who bought lingerie one day after a throat slitting. Photos of the suspect murders sorted through panties in a bubble caused a media buzz. The store owner testified that Amanda bought some thongs, erroneously described as G-strings, and that Raffaele leaned over her and said in his ungrammatical English, "We go home and have hot sex." In this courtroom, the lawyers would debate whether the sex was wild or hot, since Italy hot sex was interpreted as violent sex. "We only went to buy Amanda underwear because her things were locked up," Raffaele said later. "Everything written about us is wrong. I was only joking." The lovers did exchange one little kiss, but nobody paid attention to them. In fact, in the still photos, the store owner looked about to keel over from boredom. The incident ended unromantically when Amanda hauled out her own wallet to pay the bill. Had the couple wanted erotica, they would have gone next door, where a real lingerie store offered black lace garments splashed over nude mannequins in the window. Bubble stock girlish dresses, jackets, and pastel undies stamped with flowers and berries. If Amanda expected a torrid evening, she must have been disappointed. Afterwards, they grabbed a pizza and headed off for the meeting with the two Italian roommates that Amanda called a hurricane of emotions and stress in her email. I fired Foxy Noxie for hitting on customers appeared on November 25th in this Patrick Lumumba exclusive to the Daily Mail. He claimed he'd canned Amanda for flirting with customers. He had also psychoanalyzed his former employee as an exhibitionist and a pathological liar, insisting that she was a vengeful college student who'd struck back at him because he'd taken away her part-time job, for which he paid €5 an hour. "She was angry I was firing her and wanted revenge," Patrick said, even though he admitted in courts that she quit on November 5th. "By the end, she hated me, but I don't think she's evil. To be evil, you have to have a soul. Amanda doesn't. She's empty, dead inside." Patrick also claimed that police screamed at him when they arrested him, hit him over the head, yelled racial epithets, and kicked him. As Frank Safarzio pointed out, these details dovetailed with the kind of conduct described in Amanda's memorial, confirming the behavior of the police. Beyond this, it offers a portrait of Amanda that could not be worse, evil personified. A few days later, during a dramatic appearance of The Matrix, an Italian TV show, Patrick claimed to have been misquoted. The police had humiliated him, he explained, and it had been terrifying. They'd come to his door and taken him away without explanation, but he hadn't actually been hit. He didn't take back the parts about Amanda, however, and never explained why he texted her on November 1st and told her not to come to work if she no longer had a job. The most damaging allegations that Patrick made, though, was a claim that Amanda was jealous of her roommate, a rivalry he could scarcely have witnessed, since he told Judge Manini that he'd only had one conversation with the English girl that was about Polish vodka. Meredith was a sparkly and she lifted your spirits. Amanda was jealous, he now claimed. Prosecutor Manini had a genius for waving every juicy tidbit into his crime theories. Now he added jealousy to his list of motives along with robbery and orgies. Incredibly, Manini hadn't altered his theory in the least when Rudy appeared. He simply took one black man, Patrick, and subbed in another black man, Rudy. Police followed his lead. In Italy, prosecutors are firmly in charge, Douglas Preston explained. They tell the police what to look for, where to go, and what evidence to analyze, what evidence not to analyze. In America, the police work independently and are specifically trained in evidence gathering and criminal investigation. In Italy, the police must do what the prosecutor tells them. As a result, many criminal investigations in Italy are botched as prosecutors who are judges trained in the law, but who have no background in criminal investigation, police work, or forensic science. Amanda had far worse things to worry about over her portrayal in British tabloids. In fact, she was feeling very frightened, as she described in her diary on November 22nd. Last night, before I went to bed, I was taken down to see yet another doctor who I haven't met before. He had my results, a test they took, which says I'm positive for HIV. First of all, the guy told me not to worry. It could be a mistake. They're going to take a second test next week. I don't want to die. I want to get married and have children. I want to create something good. I want to get old. I want my time. I want my life. Why? I can't believe this. She then dutifully made a list of everyone she'd ever had sex with, describing the birth control method used with each. Then a week later, a prison official told her not to worry, that she didn't have HIV after all. When the English tabloids leaked that page of her diary in June 2008, they claimed erroneously that she'd boasted of her sexual conquest and had had 7 lovers in 60 days in Italy, even though the diary stated that 7 of her lifetime total of lovers. With perfect timing, the police announced right before Amanda's 30th court date that they'd found a drop of Amanda's blood in the small bathroom she shared with Meredith. Since tabloid forensic scientists have no accurate way to date blood or DNA, prosecutor Manini agreed that the stain was highly visible and therefore couldn't have been left with the crime, since it surely would have been washed. Then he took another imaginative leap. He claimed that Amanda had fought with Meredith on the night of the crime and that he had sustained a nosebleed, thereby accounting for the blood drop, while failing to explain why her nose dripped only once and not in the murder room. Not coincidentally, Manini also began pushing a robbery motive against Amanda, salting in details spilled from Rudy's German statement. Meredith's money was missing from the little drawer on her nightstand, investigators assumed, although they had no proof that the English girl even kept her cash there. Police implied that Amanda had stolen Meredith's rent money but noting that Amanda had a couple €100 in her purse, which was of course her own rent money. Later they would find Rudy's DNA on Meredith's handbag. Yet he would nevertheless escape a theft charge. Police entered Amanda's cell on November 29th and seized her prison diary. She had just finished writing in her maddeningly optimistic manner that she had 3 goals for her court appearance the next day. She wanted to confirm the memorial that she wrote on November 6, expressing doubt about the Patrick theory, to tell judges that she was sure she wasn't there when Meredith died, and to assure them that she had only named Patrick because I was stressed and presumed by the police they brainwashed me. Amanda drew rainbows and sunbeams on another page. She listed things she liked, like the Beatles movies, to songs by Jennifer Lopez, Alicia Keys, and the Foo Fighters. She also devoted a page to Italian swear words, saying she would need them in Capini. I don't know whether to be optimistic or not, she wrote on her second court hearing. Either way, though, I have to accept the decision of the judges and whether or not I'm freed tomorrow or later. I just have to know that I will be free sometime in the near future. Maybe not before, but at least when the investigation is over. I don't have to be afraid. I just want to go home as soon as possible. On November 30th, Amanda and Raffaele traveled in separate shiny blue police vans to the courthouse in Perugia, just down the street from Bubble. They'd been in jail now for 24 days and had returned to the old town to ask the 3-judge panel to free them. They would have created a paparazzi frenzy if the hearing hadn't been closed, because they hadn't been seen in public since the perp walk, and even then Raffaele's face had been concealed under a hood of his jacket and Amanda's under a wool hat. All photographs captured this time, all their friends back home would see was the back of their heads. Raffaele came across as a blur, while Amanda was just a small girl with her hair twisted in French braid, guards hovering all around her. Amanda was presented with her hair in braid like a proper schoolgirl, wrote Frank Savarzo of Perugia Shock. He was one of the many to characterize the Seattle girl as an actress, the inevitable result of her having recanted her first confession. She proclaimed her innocence, and to convince the court she used tears, the weapon of talent. She claimed she'd spent the night at Raffaele's place. She'd also apologized to Patrick. The scene was beautiful. The judges didn't burst into applause. Since the locals in Perugia hadn't taken an interest in Patrick Savarzio's blog, he started writing his dispatches in English, resulting in the blog finding an audience in the United Kingdom and the US, where the case followers needed a guide through the labyrinth of the Italian legal system. Though all the twists and turns the case took, he covered every court date. Now he explained that Amanda and Raffaele could eventually be set free at this point if the judges decided there wasn't enough evidence. But on December 5, 2007, in a scathing 14-page report, the judges threw the book at them. Meredith's injuries indicated more than one attacker, they said. The lack of forced entry strengthens the theory that she was killed by someone she knew. Amanda, they kept saying, had a key to the front door. No one pointed out that the front door lock often did not latch properly. Like prosecutor Giuliani Mangione, they refused to believe that anybody would have entered the cottage via Filomena's window. Judge Massimo Ricciarelli described the UW honor student as crafty and cunning, saying her role in the murder was by no means secondary. Amanda was a multi-phased personality, unattached to reality, with an elevated, one could say, fatal capacity to kill again. As for Raffaelli, the judges didn't believe he was on the computer when Meredith died and pointed to the bloody shoe print on Meredith's bed as a serious clue against him. They said he lied and claimed to have called the Cabarini before the postal police. Frank Sforza struck a cautionary note. Even though he suspected the two might be guilty, he took Judge Claudia Mattini to task for the judge's report, still accepted as gospel, even with Rudy now standing in for Patrick. Nobody's perfect. Did we already forget Claudia Mattini's description? How she described the meeting of the two with Patrick at the basketball court. Then she even knew the sexual tastes of Patrick. She knew he was lost for Meredith. Not only facts she described, but even internal feelings of the suspects. Didn't I defend her version the day it came out as naive? Indeed, it was all along. She lacked precision. About Patrick's text to Amanda, she said that it was sent about 8:30. We are talking of the murder, and she talks about she wasn't able to give an exact time. Frank also wondered how the postal police knew they'd arrived at precisely 12:35 p.m. Unlike Raffaelli, they didn't have anything concrete like photo records to back up their recollections. What if the officers didn't remember well and they arrived, let's say, 12:45? After all, they didn't go there for a murder. They went there only to deliver 2 cell phones. There wasn't a reason to memorize the time exactly. That's what we need now. We need people to be precise without bias. Judge Mattini and Prosecutor Mangione got a crack at Rudy Gaudet on December 7th. After the 7-hour interrogation, Manini called Rudy's stories ludicrous, especially the part where he ran from the bathroom after eating a spicy kebab. Rudy's lawyer, Walter Biscotti, told reporters his client couldn't name the real murderer because he hadn't gotten a good look at the man's face. He said Rudy knew Amanda only by sight and had never met Raffaelli. Rudy's other lawyer, Nicodemo Gentile, had the thankless task of explaining why his client went dancing at Domus after leaving Meredith bleeding to death on the floor. If he had gone home, he would have gone mad. Gentile insisted. So he went out and circulated and met some foreign girls. Meanwhile, Meredith's family had been pleading with the Italian police to let them bury their daughter. Finally, on December 15, 2007, they got their wish. 400 mourners attended a private service at the St. John the Baptist, her parish church in Croydon. They listened to Meredith's favorite song, U2's With or Without You, and her sister Stephanie read a poem she'd written for Meredith called Don't Say Goodbye. Among the many bouquets and one purchased by Meredith's family spelling out Mez in yellow flowers, her brother Lyle recalling her delightful sense of humor, and her sister would be looking down smiling, joking that they'd kept the cost for the flowers down by only paying for 3 letters instead of her full name. He said the family wanted to remember the good things that had happened in Meredith's life and not dwell on the bad. Amanda made one more attempt to tell her story to Manini on December 17th, an opportunity Raffaelli also sought but was rejected. She faced a daunting task when Manini would question her in the presence of 2 very high-ranking officers who helped orchestrate the all-night interrogation back in November. Flying Squad Director Domenico Gaiacati Giacatino Pravazio and the homicide lead Monica Napoleoni. No one doubted Manini was a skilled questioner. Douglas Preston in the Monster of Florence freely admitted that he'd been terrified when Manini interrogated him. Behind the desk sat the public minister of Perugia himself, Judge Giuliani Manini. Preston wrote in that book, his fleshy face carefully shaved and padded. He wore a blue shirt and carried himself like a well-bred Italian with a large sense of personal dignity. His movements smooth and precise, his voice calm and pleasant. Manini told Preston that he had a right to an interpreter, but he said that finding one might take many hours, and in his opinion, Preston spoke fluent Italian. I asked if I needed a lawyer, and he said that although it was, of course, my right, it wasn't necessary, as they merely wanted to ask a few questions of a routine nature. Preston's ordeal began with an hour of genteel questioning in the presence of Manini and several police officers, followed by an abrupt shift into a dark, accusatory tone. Despite answering their questions fully and truthfully, in the end they charged me with resentiza and false testimoniza. Preston wrote afterwards in a widely circulated email, 2 serious crimes of perjury, but said the charges would be suspended to allow me to leave Italy to be reinstated later. In other words, it seemed their goal was to get me out of Italy, never to return. Preston was not shy about saying in essays and on American TV that he believed that the deeply religious Manini was working in the monster case and in the Kercher case, acting through Amanda and Raphael. This explained, he believed, Mangioni's decision to pursue the 2 college students with single-minded intent. Mangioni, for the most part, would point a telling American journalist that he never told Preston he had to leave the country. He put the misunderstanding down to Preston's poor grasp of Italian, saying he was not realized that the American was so hampered. He also denied being under the thrall of anyone. The first time Amanda had faced Manini, she had also been lawyerless. That was during the all-night session with the Questera, when she named Patrick and placed herself at the murder scene. Manini had come with her interrogation room at an undisclosed time, perhaps 2 a.m., perhaps 3 a.m., and left at 5 a.m., a long time period that he'd never accounted for. Someone offered suggestions, Amanda said, about where someone could have been and what she might have witnessed on the night that Meredith's throat was cut. Suggestions like, maybe you heard a scream. Once she signed the statement, Manini drew up her arrest warrant. Now Amanda had 2 lawyers and a translator helped her to face down Manini in a hearing room at Capini. He began questioning her about the nickname Foxy Noxy, which the translator proceeded to mistranslate as Volpe Cativa, Evil Fox. Amanda said that her soccer squad had given her the nickname for acting fox-like on the field. They went back and forth. Manini asked if the moniker might have other meanings. She kept returning to soccer. Then the prosecutor turned almost courtly, asking how the American girl found the house in Perugia, where she had traveled in Germany, and why she called her Aunt Dorothy Dolly. Then he swung abruptly into questioning about her drug use. Amanda admitted to using marijuana at times and also hashish. Yes, she'd also shared a Spinillo on November 1st with Raffaelli. She didn't know where he got it. Who do you buy it from? Manini asked in 6 different ways. I would smoke with my friends, but I never bought it from them. I didn't buy it because, for example, I would give €10 to Laura and she would buy it for me. Under repeated questioning, Amanda would also say that Meredith shared joints with her roommates, but not often. The British girl was a serious student. Manini then asked how Amanda happened to work for Patrick, and she explained the consequences of events. She said that she had started in October but couldn't remember the exact day. They discussed her rent, €300 about a month, about $450, and Amanda said that she had withdrawn that amount before Meredith's death in order to pay the landlord. As for Rudy, she knew him vaguely. He might have come into Lashik, and perhaps he walked by when he was on the basketball court. No, she didn't think Patrick knew him. Manini then asked about Spiros Gattisos, and she said that he was a good friend and that she had hung out with him on Halloween. The prosecutor asked if she had any Spanish friends, and the obvious reference to the Spanish Erasmus students who lived in the flat above Rudy's. Amanda said that she did not know any Spanish people in Perugia. Then they discussed the night Meredith was murdered. Amanda said that she had read Harry Potter in German and then watched Amelie and done other things at Raffaelli's. Then she was not able to tell him exactly what time she did what because she could not recall many details of the evening. Then they had the usual discussion about text messages, and Amanda insisted she said goodnight after saying see you later. Manini was particularly interested in how Amanda had learned Meredith had died, since the English girl had told him that she knew the details only the killer would know. She said Raffaelli had told her what Paola and Luca said in the car going to the Questera on November 2nd. She also remembered Philomena saying, "Oh God, Meredith," but didn't learn much from her. The police had also supplied a few details while she was giving her witness statement as for finding Meredith in the wardrobe story. Amanda said she was merely repeating what she had heard, perhaps garbled form, given the language barrier. Amanda had been answering questions for about nearly 6 hours at this point. Then Manini asked why she had named Patrick. He peppered her with questions. She answered him calmly at first, saying the police had asked her to make suggestions, and in her state of mind, in her imagination, after many hours, she thought that the vision she was seeing might be true. She had been under great stress, she said, because the police kept insisting that she was guilty. Manini stepped up the questioning. He raised his voice, increasing the pace. He wanted to know exactly why she named Patrick. He insisted that the police hadn't known about Patrick until she brought up his name, which seemed unlikely because they knew she worked at Le Chic and they had boasted of startling her by showing her the now famous text, which still had been on Amanda's cell phone when her November 5th and 6th interrogation began. As Amanda now told Manini, the police were very suspicious about the message, and she began to believe that Patrick was involved. They kept asking her to imagine things. When they asked, "Did you hear a scream?" she answered, "Well, I must have covered my ears," and that got written into the declarations. Why is it only at certain points that Patrick appears? Manini kept asking, although he must have known the answer since he had led the investigation. Moreover, high-ranking police officers had supervised the proceedings from the control room, despite Manini himself having been in Amanda's interrogation chamber from roughly 2 to 3 a.m., a story which varied until 5:45 a.m. He seemed mystified by the very statement he'd watched her sign without a lawyer to advise her. Now she had two. Here's an exchange about why she accused Patrick of killing Meredith. Manini, in the subsequent morale that was written before going to prison, you have not substantially denied this accusation. It was, however, always in terms, let's say, of certainty between the image, between the dream and the reality, and in the sum in manner. However, you have not, it seems, that you say in this memorial, I see still before me this image, and then you see while you hear, you say it in the first memorial that you made, I hear Meredith scream, and you covered your ears. Why do you have these images, the ears, the screams? However, it is not that it changes very much. Lawyer, no. However, she says that she was very confused. She was under a lot of stress. Then Manini continued hammering Amanda about the text messages, saying it was normal for police to wonder when they see a series of messages between two people not long before the hours of a crime. But he didn't manage to express his thoughts succinctly. Finally, Amanda answered one question out of all this verbiage about why she'd named Patrick as the killer. Because I was thinking that it might be true. Then she burst into tears and, on advice of her lawyers, said no more. Nobody was listening, she said later. It was more and more of the same, yelling and repeating of questions, the disbelief, more of what she'd gone through during the undocumented hours of November 2007. Rudy's increasingly detailed alibi did not impress a three-panel on December 20th, 2007. They refused to grant him release, saying his testimony was so riddled with lies that it couldn't provide even a minimal or partial account of what happened. Judge Andrea Biscotti said that she was baffled as to the motive, not understanding how young people of the same age who are also acquaintances of the victim could take their thoughtlessness to such an extreme as to commit such a cruel crime without a strong conflict or an extreme state of alteration. Yet she had no doubt that the trio had done the deed while engaging in a sex game. The judges placed great resilience on the confused testimony of Nerea Cabazali, the woman who'd heard the scream and the people running on November 1st, but didn't see who the people were and hadn't looked at her watch. Nevertheless, for the judges, her testimony was the confirmation of a group participation in a ferocious criminal act that cannot be considered in passive terms for any of those present. Okay, bye.